There's a certain kind of embarrassment that does not leave you when the day is over. It does not shout. It does not break things. It just settles into a man quietly and stays there. Most people know the feeling. Maybe not in a grocery store. Maybe not with strangers standing a few feet away pretending not to listen. But somewhere. A missed payment. A call you had to make. A moment when the person who should have made things easier somehow found a way to make them worse. This is a story about one of those moments. It happened on a cold Tuesday in March in a small town in Ohio, in a grocery store called Milfield Foods. And if you had been there that afternoon, you probably would have told somebody about it before the day was over. Not because there was yelling, not because there was some dramatic scene, but because every once in a while life puts something right in front of you so plain and so human that you cannot look away from it. And before I tell you what happened in that store, you need to understand the man standing at the register, because if you do not understand Joshua, you will miss the part of this story that really matters. Joshua was 42 years old, built like a man who had spent most of his life lifting things that did not want to be lifted. He had broad shoulders, thick wrists, rough hands, and the kind of tired strength that comes from years of real work. He had been in construction for almost 20 years, and not the kind where a man mostly points and talks. Joshua had started at the bottom. Concrete, framing, long days in bad heat, rain delays that turned into 10-hour headaches, jobs where your lunch got cold before you had the chance to touch it. By the time this story took place, he was running a crew of 15 men on an overpass project outside of town. He was respected, not because he demanded it, but because he knew how to work and did not ask other men to do anything he would not do himself. He was the kind of supervisor who remembered whose daughter was sick, whose truck was in the shop, whose back had been bothering him since November. Men trusted him. Men liked him. Men who are not impressed easily liked him. But there are a lot of good men who know how to carry steel and pour concrete and keep a crew on schedule who do not know what to do with the person they love. Joshua was one of those men. He had been married to Samantha for 11 years. From the outside, they looked fine. Nice enough house on Carver Street. Decent yard. Dog named Biscuit. 2 cars in the driveway. She worked as an office manager at a dental practice in town. He brought home steady money. They did not look like the kind of couple people worry about. And that is part of what made it hard to see at first. Samantha was not the kind of woman who humiliated her husband in loud public scenes. She was smarter than that. More controlled than that. What she did was smaller, and in some ways smaller things do more damage because they are easier to explain away. It was the little sigh when Joshua said something slightly wrong. The quick eye roll when he forgot a detail. The way she could make a simple mistake sound like proof that he was fundamentally disappointing. She had a favorite line too. Of course you did. It can mean anything. Forgot to bring something in from the truck. Took the wrong exit. Bought the wrong brand. Misheard what she said. Of course you did. And after enough years, a sentence like that stops sounding like a sentence and starts sounding like a verdict. Joshua had gotten used to it in the way people get used to a noise they should not have to live with. He laughed things off. He made excuses for her. She's just stressed. She didn't mean it like that. That's just how she talks. Men do that sometimes. Especially men who are taught that loyalty means endurance. Especially men who are more comfortable fixing a roof than admitting a marriage is wearing them down from the inside. Larry knew better. Larry had known Joshua since their 20s. He was the kind of friend every decent man should have at least once in his life. Funny, blunt, impossible to impress, and allergic to fake niceness. He had told Joshua more than once, "Man, I'm going to say something and you can get mad if you want, but your wife talks to you like she doesn't even like you." Joshua would shrug, laugh, reach for a beer, say something like, "She's particular." Larry hated that word. No, he'd say, "Particular is how somebody likes their steak. That ain't particular." But Joshua always let slide. Maybe because facing the truth would have required him to do something about it. Maybe because when a man loves somebody long enough, he starts protecting the story of the relationship, even after the relationship stops protecting him. The truth was Joshua loved Samantha more than she deserved. That sounds harsh, but sometimes harsh is just honest. He remembered what wine she liked. He picked up her dry cleaning when she forgot. He stopped for things on the way home without complaining. He listened when she talked about people at work he did not know and would never meet. He paid more of the bills than made sense because she liked nice things, and he kept telling himself it was worth it to see her happy. He had even been quietly planning a weekend trip to Columbus for the two of them. Nothing fancy, just a hotel, dinner, maybe a little shopping, a chance to get out of town. He had not told her yet. He wanted it to feel like a surprise. That was Joshua too. He still believed effort counted. He still believed kindness, if kept up long enough, eventually made a home warmer. Some people hear that and think it means he was weak. I do not think that. I think he was hopeful in a place that did not deserve so much hope. There's a difference. Their neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Deborah, had once said to Pamela from 2 houses down, "That man is nicer than the life he's living." Deborah was not a dramatic woman. She did not gossip much, and when she made up her mind about a person, she was usually right. She had heard Samantha through the wall before. Not screaming, just that clipped, sharp tone that can cut a man down 1 inch at a time. She talks to him, Deborah had said, like he is an inconvenience she got stuck with. Pamela remembered that later. People remembered a lot of things later. But on that Tuesday afternoon, none of that was in Joshua's mind in a clear way. It was all there, of course, because a marriage is always there, even when a man is thinking about other things. But that day had started out ordinary. In some ways, more ordinary than most. The overpass job had been hit with a weather delay. So instead of working until 5, Joshua and the crew shut things down a little after 2. It was one of those gray Ohio afternoons that can make 3 o'clock feel like evening already. The sky looked tired. The air had that damp edge to it. Joshua was not in a bad mood, though. He had gotten a decent amount done. Nobody got hurt. The inspectors had not caused trouble. He was heading home earlier than expected. And the night before, Samantha had mentioned that she wanted baked lemon chicken. Not asked. Mentioned. With Samantha, that was close enough to a request. Joshua had filed it away. So on the drive back, he stopped at Milfield Foods. Everyone in town knew Milfield Foods. Big bright store on Route 7. Not fancy, not run down, just one of those places that becomes part of people's weekly routine. Donald had managed it for about 12 years and knew regulars by name. Teenagers got their first jobs there. Elderly people came in mostly to talk to somebody for 5 minutes. Busy moms rushed through with carts full of things they would forget they bought by the time they got home. On paper, it was just a grocery store. In a town like Milfield, it was more than that. Joshua grabbed a cart and headed in. He moved through the store the way men shop when they are there for a reason and do not want to spend an extra 20 minutes pretending they enjoy it. Chicken breast, lemons, garlic, asparagus, pasta, a bottle of wine he thought Samantha would like. He paused in the spice aisle for a second because he could not remember whether they were low on paprika or thyme, then decided to grab one of each and be safe. There was something almost hopeful in the way he moved that day. Not excited, not foolishly cheerful, just a steady, decent mood. A man taking care of his evening. A man trying, again, to do one more thing right. And there is something about that that matters. Because stories like this do not hit hard unless life is ordinary for a while first. If a man starts the day shattered, there is nowhere for the floor to drop out. Joshua was not shattered. He was thinking about dinner. He was thinking about whether Biscuit had been let out that morning long enough. He was thinking he might check Columbus hotel prices that night after Samantha went to shower. He was thinking about normal things. That is what makes what happened next hurt the way it did. At around 3:15, he rolled his cart into a checkout lane where Anna was working. Anna was maybe 19, 20 at most, one of those young cashiers who still made an effort to sound kind even when she had been on her feet half the day. She smiled when she saw him. "Hey, Joshua." He gave her a nod, started unloading the cart. Chicken, produce, pasta, wine, a couple of smaller things. Anna scanned with the steady rhythm cashiers get when they are good at the job. Beep, beep, beep. Not much was said. It did not need to be. There were only a few people nearby. A woman farther back with a handbasket. A teenager near the entrance, sitting on the bench most people ignored. A man near customer service arguing softly with his phone. Regular store sounds. Nothing strange. Nothing big. Just the quiet middle of an afternoon in a town that was not expecting to be remembered for anything that day. Anna read out the total. Joshua reached for his wallet without looking. Back pocket first. That automatic move you make when your body thinks it already knows where something is. His hand touched denim. Nothing else. He frowned, not worried yet, just thrown off. He checked again. Then the other back pocket, even though he never kept it there. Then the front pockets. Then his jacket. And you know that feeling when a small problem has not fully arrived, but you can already feel it walking toward you? That was the moment. His shoulders changed first. Then his face. Anna noticed. "You okay?" Joshua let out a quick breath through his nose and gave a half smile that did not mean anything. "Yeah, hang on 1 second." He checked the cart, though he knew it would not be there. He patted his jacket again. He looked down like the wallet might somehow appear if he looked hard enough. Then he remembered exactly where it was. Not vaguely. Exactly. On the kitchen counter, next to the coffee maker. He had taken it out that morning to pull his insurance card and set it down and walked off without it. There are mistakes people make, and then there are mistakes people make when the wrong person is waiting at the other end of the consequence. Joshua went still for maybe 2 seconds and had already scanned almost everything. "I'm so sorry," he said, and this is the part that matters, because he sounded embarrassed before anybody had even done anything to embarrass him. "I left my wallet at home. My wife's only about 10 minutes away. Let me just call her. She can read me the car number or come by." Anna nodded right away. "No rus. I can hold it." She said it kindly. "No attitude. No irritation." But there is a particular shame in having to pause a normal transaction and explain yourself in front of other people. Grown adults know that shame well. Joshua stepped a little to the side and pulled out his phone. And I want to slow down here just for a second because this was the last quiet moment in the story. This was the last point where the day could still have gone 100 different harmless ways. Samantha could have answered and said, "No problem, give me a minute." She could have laughed a little, called him absent-minded, read the number off the card, and ended the whole thing in 30 seconds. She could have been mildly annoyed and still helped. She could have done the bare minimum. That is all this moment required from her. Not sacrifice, not heroism, not some grand gesture of love, just the bare minimum. Joshua tapped her name and lifted the phone to his ear, and standing there with one hand on the cart, groceries on the belt, Anna waiting politely, the small sounds of the store going on around him, he had no way yet of knowing that in less than a minute, a 14-year-old boy he had never spoken to was going to see more clearly what his dignity was worth in the woman he had been married to for 11 years. Joshua held the phone to his ear and listened to the first ring. It is strange how long a single ring can feel when you are standing in front of a checkout counter with groceries already scanned and someone waiting politely on the other side of the register. He shifted his weight a little, glanced down at the items on the belt as if checking them again might somehow fix the situation. The second ring started and then clicked off. Samantha answered without greeting. "What is it?" Her voice had that tight, distracted tone she used when she was in the middle of something and did not want to be interrupted. Joshua kept his voice low out of instinct, the way people do when they do not want strangers listening to their business. "Hey, I'm at Milfield Foods. I ran in to grab the stuff for dinner. I just realized I left my wallet on the kitchen counter this morning." There was a short pause. Not a shocked pause. Not even an annoyed pause. Just the silence of someone waiting for the part of the story that actually concerns them. Joshua continued, still calm. "They've already rung most of it up. Could you either read me the card number or swing by for a minute? You're only like 10 minutes away." Another pause, long enough for Joshua to shift his eyes toward Anna and give a small apologetic half smile. Anna looked down at the register screen, pretending to check something that did not need checking. She was trying to give him privacy without making a show of it. Behind him, the woman with the basket had stepped into line. She stood quietly, one hand resting on the basket handle, not impatient, just waiting. Samantha spoke again. "Joshua." That was it at first, just his name, but the way she said it already carried the answer inside it. "Yeah," he said. "I'm Busse. I told you before you need to start being more responsible with your things." Her tone had shifted now. Not loud, not emotional, just firm in that cutting way that makes a simple sentence land harder than shouting. Joshua lowered his voice even more. "I get that. I know. It's just this one time. It'll take 2 minutes if you read the number." Another pause. In the quiet space of a grocery store, that does not seem like much. But when you're the one standing there with people nearby, it feels different. Samantha sighed, and the sigh carried through the phone clearly enough that Joshua felt it before she even spoke. I'm not driving all the way out there because you forgot your wallet. Joshua swallowed. You don't have to drive if you don't want to. Just grab the card and read me the numbers. The sigh came again, sharper this time. Joshua, I'm in the middle of something. If you forgot it, then put the groceries back and go get it. I'm not your babysitter. The sentence hung there for a moment. It was the kind of sentence people sometimes say privately in kitchens or living rooms. It was not the kind of sentence that usually lands in the open air of a checkout lane. Joshua glanced down at the floor, pressing his lips together slightly. Sam, it's really not a big thing. I'm already here. They've already rung it up. Then maybe next time you'll remember your wallet, she replied. No hosetashchen. No sofnis. Just a flat answer delivered like the conversation had already gone on longer than it deserved. Joshua looked up briefly, his eyes flicking across the store as if making sure nobody was paying attention. The truth was people had heard enough to understand the situation even if they had not caught every word. Anna was still looking down, scanning nothing. The woman with the basket stood very still behind him. Near the entrance, the teenage boy on the bench had shifted slightly forward. Joshua spoke one more time, and this time there was something smaller in his voice than before. Okay, I understand. I'll figure something out. Samantha did not respond. The call ended. Joshua lowered the phone slowly and looked at the screen for a second before locking it. When he turned back toward the register, he cleared his throat once, like a man preparing to say something ordinary after something that was not ordinary at all. I'm sorry about that, he said quietly to Anna. Could you hold the groceries for me? I'll run home and grab the card. Anna nodded right away. Of course. No problem. She reached toward the register to suspend the transaction. Joshua started gathering the items near the end of the belt so she could move them aside more easily. His movements were careful and deliberate, the way people move when they're trying not to show that something inside them just took a hit. If you had walked past the lane at that moment, you might have thought nothing much had happened. A man forgot his wallet. He would come back. That happens every day. But people who were standing close enough could feel the difference between a normal inconvenience and the quiet humiliation of being refused help by the one person who should have offered it without a second thought. Pamela, the woman holding the basket behind him, shifted her weight slightly, but did not step forward. She had heard enough of the phone call to understand what had happened. She was around 60, the kind of person who had lived long enough to recognize certain tones in a marriage. She did not say anything. Most people do not in moments like that. They just witness. Joshua finished sliding the last item aside and rested his hands on the cart handle for a moment. His shoulders had dropped just a little compared to how he stood earlier. Not dramatically, just enough that someone paying attention could notice. He gave Anna another quick nod. Thanks. I'll be back. He started to turn the cart away from the register, and that was when a quiet voice spoke up from his right side. Excuse me, sir. The voice was soft but clear enough that Joshua paused and looked over. Standing a few feet away was the boy from the bench near the entrance. Up close, he looked even younger than 14. Thin frame, hoodie a little too large, a small tear near the collar that had been stitched once and torn again, jeans slightly too long at the ankle, sneakers worn enough that the rubber had faded unevenly along the sides. He stood with his hands half tucked into the front pocket of the hoodie, not slouched, not timid exactly, but careful in the way people become when they're used to being overlooked. Joshua blinked once, a little confused. Yeah? The boy stepped closer to the edge of the checkout lane, but kept a respectful distance. How much is it? Joshua glanced back at the register screen instinctively, then back at the boy. What? The boy nodded toward the groceries. Your stuff. How much was it? Joshua shook his head gently, assuming he misunderstood. It's okay. I forgot my wallet. I'm just going to run home and grab it. The boy hesitated for a second, then took another small step forward. But how much is it? Anna looked up now, curious but silent. Joshua glanced at the screen again. 47 and change, I think. The boy nodded once, almost to himself. Then he reached into the front pocket of his hoodie and pulled something out. 3 bills folded together. A 5 and 2 ones. He held them carefully between his fingers, then placed them on the edge of the checkout counter. You can use this. For a moment, Joshua just stared at the money like his brain had not quite caught up with what his eyes were seeing. No, he said immediately, shaking his head. No, I can't take that. The boy did not pull the money back. He looked at Joshua with a calm seriousness that did not match his age. It's okay. Joshua's voice softened, but it stayed firm. Son, I appreciate it. Really? But that's your money. The boy shrugged slightly. It's only $7. Joshua almost smiled at that, not because it was funny, but because of the strange simplicity of it. Exactly, he said. You should keep it. The boy glanced down at the bills, then back up again. Somebody helped my mom once when we needed it. The words came out slowly, like something he had thought about before speaking. They didn't have to. She still talks about it. The checkout lane had grown very quiet. Pamela stood a few feet back, watching. Anna had stopped moving entirely. Even a man near customer service had stopped arguing with his phone and turned his head slightly toward the scene. The boy pushed the money a little closer across the counter. Please take it. Joshua looked at the boy again, really looked this time. The thin face, the worn clothes, the careful way he stood. And something about that small stack of bills sitting between them made Joshua feel something shift inside his chest. He opened his mouth to protest again. But before he could say anything, another voice spoke from behind the register area. Ring it through, Anna. Donald had appeared from the aisle leading toward the back office. He walked over with the steady calm of someone who had managed this store long enough to read a room quickly. His eyes moved from the money on the counter to the boy, then to Joshua. Anna hesitated for half a second. Donald gave a small nod. Ring it through. The register beeped as she resumed the transaction. The total flashed again on the screen. Donald reached into the pocket of his apron, pulled out his own debit card, and tapped it against the reader. The machine chirped softly. Transaction approved. He looked at Joshua and then at the boy. Looks like you had someone willing to help you today, he said simply. And in that moment, something changed in the air of that grocery store that nobody there would forget for a long time. Donald did not make a show of it. That was the first thing people noticed later when they talked about that moment. He did not clap the boy on the back or say anything loud enough to draw attention from across the store. He simply slid his card back into his apron pocket, glanced once more at the $7 on the counter, and then at the boy. That was a good thing you did, he said quietly. The boy gave a small nod, not proud, not shy, just accepting the words the way a kid accepts recognition from an adult he respects. Joshua was still standing there, one hand resting on the card handle, trying to catch up with what had just happened. A few seconds earlier, he had been preparing to push the cart away and drive home embarrassed. Now the groceries were being bagged again. The receipt was printing, and the $7 were still sitting on the counter between him and a boy he had never met before. Joshua picked up the bills slowly and held them out toward the boy. Here, he said. You keep this. The boy shook his head right away. No, it's okay. No, Joshua said gently. It's your money. The boy did not move his hands. You needed help. It was said with such plain certainty that Joshua did not immediately know how to respond. There was no performance in the kid's voice. No sense that he expected praise or thanks. He had simply seen a man in trouble and stepped in the way someone steps in to hold a door for another person. Joshua looked down at the 3 bills in his hand, then back at the boy again. What's your name? The boy hesitated half a second before answering. Jason. Joshua nodded. Jason, I appreciate what you try to do. I really do, but I can't take money from you. Jason shrugged slightly, like the exact direction the money traveled mattered less to him than the fact that the offer had been made. Donald leaned against the counter lightly, watching the exchange with quiet interest. Pamela was still standing a few feet behind them, her basket hanging loosely from one arm. Nobody was rushing the moment. The rest of the store seemed to have gone about its business, but inside that small circle around the checkout lane, everything had slowed down just enough to let the meaning of the moment settle in. Joshua folded the bills once and held them out again. Take it, he said softly. Jason looked at the money for a second, then took it back without argument and slipped it into the pocket of his hoodie. Donald nodded approvingly. That's settled then. Anna finished bagging the groceries and placed the last bag into the cart. Joshua took the receipt without looking at it. For a moment, he simply stood there, then he looked back at Jason again. Something about the boy's calm expression stayed with him. Most kids in that situation would have looked uncomfortable or eager to escape attention. Jason didn't. He stood with the quiet steadiness of someone used to observing adults more than speaking to them. Joshua crouched down slightly, so he was closer to eye level. "You waiting for someone?" he asked. Jason nodded. "My mom. She's shopping." Jason shook his head. "Working? Here?" "No, cleaning job down the road." He pointed vaguely toward the main street outside. "I wait here until she's done." Joshua glanced toward the entrance bench where Jason had been sitting earlier. It suddenly made more sense why Donald had looked at the boy the way he did. This was not the first afternoon Jason had spent there. Donald spoke up then, his tone casual but warm. "Jason stops by sometimes after school," he said. "Safer here than wandering around town." Joshua nodded slowly. The explanation sat heavily in his mind. The boy who had just tried to help him was spending his afternoon sitting on a grocery store bench waiting for his mother to finish a cleaning job. That image rearranged something in Joshua's chest. He stood up again and rested his hands on the cart handle. "Jason," he said after a moment, "would you do me a favor?" Jason tilted his head slightly. "What?" "Sit with me for a couple minutes." Joshua gestured toward the small seating area near the entrance. "I want to hear about how a 14-year-old ends up being the most decent person in a grocery store." Jason looked uncertain for a second, glancing toward Donald as if checking whether it was okay. Donald nodded once. "Go ahead." They walked together toward the bench. Pamela followed at a slower pace and sat at the far end of the bench without saying anything, her basket resting on the floor beside her feet. She did not join the conversation, but she stayed close enough to hear. Joshua set the grocery bags beside the bench and leaned back slightly. For the first time since he had entered the store, he let himself exhale fully. Jason sat with his hands resting on his knees, his posture straight in the careful way kids sometimes sit when they are around adults they don't know well. "So," Joshua said, "how old are you?" 14. "School get out already?" Jason nodded. "I used to take the bus, but it doesn't come by the shelter." Joshua turned his head slightly. "Shelter?" Jason gave a small shrug like it was no big thing. "We've been there a few months." Joshua felt the words land slowly. "You and your mom?" "Yeah." "What happened?" Jason looked down for a moment, not embarrassed, just thinking about how to answer. "She lost her job last year. The apartment got too expensive." He said it the way people say the weather changed. No drama, just a fact. She's trying to save enough to get another place. Joshua nodded slowly. "What's her name?" "Deborah." The name made Pamela glance up for a moment. Joshua didn't notice. He was watching Jason's face as the boy continued speaking in that calm, steady voice. "She works a couple cleaning jobs now. Sometimes late. That's why you wait here." Jason nodded again. "It's warm. Donald lets me stay." Joshua looked toward the register where Donald was now helping another customer as if nothing unusual had happened. Then he looked back at Jason. "And those $7? Jason reached into his pocket and pulled the folded bills out again, smoothing them absent-mindedly against his knee. "I helped an old guy carry groceries to his car a few days ago." "Mr. Greer," Donald called from across the store without looking up. Jason smiled slightly. "Yeah." Joshua chuckled quietly. "That sounds like him." Jason folded the bills again and slid them back into his pocket. "He said it was for my trouble." Joshua leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "And you were ready to give it away just like that?" Jason shrugged. "It's just money." Pamela spoke for the first time then, her voice soft. $7, it can be a lot when you don't have much." Jason looked at her politely. "Maybe, but my mom says if somebody needs help and you can help, you do it." Joshua sat there for a moment, letting that sentence sink in. He thought about the phone call from 10 minutes earlier. He thought about Samantha's voice through the speaker. Then he looked back at Jason again, and something like quiet respect settled across his face. "Your mom sounds like a good woman." Jason nodded once. "She is." Joshua leaned back again and rested his hands on his thighs. The store noise had returned to normal now. Registers beeping, carts rolling, distant conversation. But inside his mind things were shifting slowly into a new shape. 10 minutes earlier, he had been standing in a checkout lane, trying not to feel embarrassed about forgetting his wallet. Now he was sitting beside a 14-year-old boy who had offered everything he had just to keep a stranger from walking out of a store feeling small. And Joshua realized something in that moment that he had not fully understood before. Sometimes dignity does not come from the people who are supposed to guard it. Sometimes it shows up in the most unexpected place imaginable. And when it does, it changes more than just the moment you were standing in. Joshua sat on the bench for a while longer after that sentence, longer than he expected he would. Sometimes when a moment passes that quickly, people stand up and move on because they do not know what else to do with it. But Joshua did not feel like rushing away. The groceries were still sitting beside him in 2 plastic bags. The lemons pressed lightly against the clear side of one bag, the bottle of wine lying on its side near the top. For a moment, he simply watched the automatic doors open and close as people walked in and out of the store. Jason sat quietly next to him, not fidgeting the way most kids his age might. Pamela remained at the other end of the bench, still present but respectfully distant, like someone who understood that what had happened was bigger than casual conversation. Joshua finally turned his head toward Jason again. "You said you like school?" Jason nodded. "Yeah." "What's your favorite subject?" Jason answered without hesitation. "Math." Joshua smiled a little at that. "Math? Yeah." Not many kids say that first. Jason shrugged. "It makes sense. If you follow the steps, you get the answer." Joshua chuckled softly. "Wish life worked that way." Jason did not respond to that. He just watched the entrance doors again. Joshua leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. "You thinking about college someday?" Jason looked down at his hands, then back up. "Maybe. I want to be an engineer." The word came out carefully, like something he had been holding on to for a long time. Joshua felt something tighten in his chest again, but this time it was not embarrassment. It was something closer to determination. "Engineer, huh?" Jason nodded. "They build bridges and stuff." Joshua smiled wider now. "Funny thing about that." Jason looked at him curiously. "What?" "I'm working on a bridge right now." Jason's eyes lit up just slightly. "Really?" "Yeah. Overpass project outside town." "That's cool." Joshua nodded toward the store windows. "Concrete, steel, traffic patterns. A lot more complicated than it looks from the road." Jason seemed to think about that for a moment. "Do you like it?" Joshua paused before answering. "Most days, yeah." He glanced down at the grocery bags, then back up again. "Some days it's just work." Jason nodded, as if that answer made perfect sense. Pamela stood slowly, then, picking up her basket. "I'm going to finish my shopping," she said quietly. Joshua nodded politely. "Nice meeting you." She smiled at Jason as well. "You too." But she did not walk far. She moved only a few aisles away, still within sight of the entrance area. Joshua watched her go for a second, then turned back to Jason. "What time does your mom finish?" 6. Joshua glanced at the wall clock above the service desk. It read a little after 4. "So you got a while." Jason nodded again. "Usually I draw or do homework." "You got homework today?" Jason reached into his backpack beside the bench and pulled out a thin notebook. "Math worksheet." Joshua looked at the paper as Jason opened it. Rows of equations. Fractions, variables, the kind of thing that might frustrate a lot of kids. "You stuck on any of it?" Joshua asked. Jason shook his head. "No." Joshua laughed quietly. "Show off." Jason gave the faintest smile. Joshua leaned back again and thought for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts for a second and tapped a name. Jason listened as the call rang. "Larry," Joshua said when the line connected. "Hey, what are you doing the next couple weeks?" Larry's voice came through the speaker, faint but amused. "Hello to you too." "Why?" Joshua looked over at Jason while he spoke. "I met a kid today." Larry laughed once. "You're going to need to give me more than that." Joshua kept his tone casual but steady. 14. Smart. Wants to be an engineer. Just needs a little help staying on track. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Larry knew Joshua well enough to recognize when something serious sat behind his calm voice. "All right," Larry said slowly. "What kind of help?" Joshua glanced at Jason again. "School paperwork. Maybe talking to somebody on the board. I'll explain later." Another pause. Then Larry said simply, "All right, call me tonight." Joshua ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Jason had watched the whole thing quietly. "Was that about me?" he asked. Joshua nodded once. "Maybe." Jason looked slightly confused, but did not press further. The two of them sat there another minute or two in comfortable silence. Customers passed through the entrance doors. A cart rattled across the floor tiles. Somewhere in the store a jar fell, and someone laughed it off. Life continued moving around them like it always does. But something had shifted quietly inside Joshua during those few minutes. It was not dramatic. It was not some grand decision he announced out loud. It was simply the recognition that sometimes the world hands you a chance to do something decent, and if you ignore it, you will remember that moment for the rest of your life. Joshua stood up and picked up the grocery bags. "You want some hot chocolate?" he asked Jason. Jason looked surprised. "Really?" "Sure." They walked over to the small drink station near the deli counter. Joshua handed Jason a paper cup and filled 2 cups from the machine. Jason held his with both hands, warming his fingers around it. They returned to the bench and sat again. Jason took a careful sip. "Thanks." "No problem." Joshua watched him for a moment. "You know something?" Jason looked up. "What?" "Most adults wouldn't have done what you did back there." Jason looked genuinely puzzled by that. "Why not?" Joshua thought about the phone call with Samantha again. He thought about the way the words had sounded in his ear while strangers stood nearby. He thought about the quiet certainty with which this 14-year-old had stepped forward. After a moment, he answered honestly. "Sometimes people forget what helping someone actually means." Jason looked down at his cup for a second, then nodded slowly. "My mom says people remember kindness longer than money." Joshua smiled faintly. "Your mom says a lot of smart things." The clock ticked closer to 5 as the two of them talked about small things after that. School subjects, favorite movies, the stray dog Jason once tried to adopt, the way bridge construction cranes look like giant insects from far away. None of it felt forced. It felt like two people simply passing time in a place where something meaningful had happened without either of them planning it. By the time Jason's mother arrived later that evening, Joshua had already left the store. But what happened in the weeks after that afternoon would slowly spread through Milfield in the quiet way small-town stories always do. Larry made a call to someone he knew on the school board. Within 2 weeks, Jason was re-enrolled at Milfield Middle School with proper transportation arrangements from the shelter. Donald met Jason's mother, Deborah, the next afternoon when she came to pick him up and mentioned a part-time inventory position that had been sitting unfilled in the back office. She started the following Monday. Pamela, who had watched the entire moment from the checkout line, turned out to serve on the board of a local community assistance group. That evening, she made 3 phone calls before dinner. By the end of the month, Jason and his mother had been approved for temporary housing assistance that would help them transition out of the shelter and into a small apartment across town. None of those things happened because anyone planned some grand act of charity that afternoon. They happened because a 14-year-old boy had taken $7 out of his pocket without hesitation. And when Joshua finally drove home that evening with the groceries still sitting beside him in the passenger seat, he realized that what had started as the most embarrassing moment of his day had quietly turned into something else entirely. Something that would not leave him the same man who had walked into that store earlier that afternoon. Joshua drove home slower than usual that evening. The groceries were still in the passenger seat beside him, the plastic bags shifting quietly each time the car turned or slowed at a light. It had started getting darker outside, the gray Ohio sky turning into that dull early evening color that makes streetlights come on before you expect them. Normally, Joshua would have had the radio on during a drive like that, something low and forgettable in the background. But the radio stayed off. His mind was still back inside Milfield Foods, replaying the moment when Jason's small hand placed 3 folded bills on the counter. $7. Joshua had spent more than that on coffee without thinking about it before. But that $7 had carried a weight he could not shake. He kept seeing the boy's face again. Not proud, not embarrassed, just steady. Joshua had seen a lot of men do brave things in construction work over the years. Guys climbing steel in bad wind, guys jumping in to help when equipment slipped or something dangerous happened on site. But there had been something different about what Jason did. It had been quiet, immediate, no calculation. And the thing that stayed with Joshua most was not the money itself. It was the reason Jason gave. Somebody helped my mom once when we needed it. That was it. No speech, no explanation, just a memory of kindness that had lived inside that kid long enough to shape how he moved through the world. Joshua turned onto Carver Street and pulled into his driveway. The house looked exactly the way it always did. Porch light off, curtains half drawn in the living room window, Biscuit's silhouette faintly visible near the front door where the dog had probably heard the car engine. Nothing about the place suggested that the man stepping out of the truck was carrying a different weight than the one who had left that morning. Joshua grabbed the grocery bags and walked inside. Biscuit greeted him with a familiar burst of excited tail, thumping and circling that dog's offer without asking questions. Joshua bent down automatically and scratched behind the dog's ears. "Hey, buddy," he said quietly. Biscuit wagged harder. The kitchen lights were already on. Samantha had not come home yet. Joshua set the bags on the counter and started unpacking them slowly. Lemons into the fruit bowl, chicken into the refrigerator, garlic near the cutting board, asparagus wrapped loosely in a damp paper towel the way he had learned to keep it fresh longer. The bottle of wine stayed on the counter for a moment while he washed his hands at the sink. The rhythm of cooking came easily to him. It always had. There was something calming about following simple steps with your hands. Slice the lemons. Season the chicken. Preheat the oven. It was not fancy cooking, just careful cooking. By the time Samantha's car pulled into the driveway around 6:30, the lemon chicken was already in the oven and the smell of garlic and butter had filled the kitchen. Joshua was standing at the stove, stirring pasta when the door opened. Samantha stepped in, dropping her purse onto the small table near the entrance. She looked tired, but otherwise exactly the same as she had that morning. Well-dressed, composed, the faint edge of impatience that seemed to follow her through most evenings. "You're home early," she said as she walked into the kitchen. Joshua nodded without looking up from a pot. "Weather delay at the job." Samantha glanced toward the oven. "That smells good." "Lemon chicken," Joshua said. "Like you mentioned last night." Samantha hummed softly in acknowledgement, pouring herself a glass of water at the sink. For a minute or two, they moved around the kitchen without speaking much. It was the kind of quiet that had settled into their evenings over the years. Not angry silence, just two people sharing space while thinking about different things. Joshua drained the pasta and turned off the burner. Samantha leaned against the counter. "Anything interesting happen today?" she asked casually. Joshua set the pot down and wiped his hands on a dish towel. He looked at her then, really looked at her. The question hung between them for a moment. "Actually," he said slowly, "something did." Samantha lifted an eyebrow slightly. "Oh." Joshua pulled out a chair at the kitchen table and sat down. Samantha joined him a minute later with her glass of water. The oven timer beeped softly. Joshua stood up, removed the chicken, plated the food, and carried the plates to the table. Only when both of them were seated did he begin explaining what had happened. He told her about stopping at Milfield Foods, about forgetting the wallet, about calling her. He did not raise his voice when he described the conversation. He simply repeated it in the same quiet tone she had used earlier that afternoon. Samantha listened while she cut into the chicken on her plate. Her expression barely changed. Joshua continued, telling her about the checkout line, about Anna holding the groceries, about the boy on the bench. When he reached the part where Jason walked up and asked how much the groceries cost, Samantha paused mid-bite but did not say anything. Joshua described the $7 then, the folded bills, the way the boy had pushed them across the counter, the silence in the store, Donald paying the rest. By the time he finished speaking, the room had grown very still. Samantha set her fork down lightly on the plate. "Well," she said after a moment, "the whole situation could have been avoided if you'd remembered your wallet." The words landed exactly the way they had landed so many times before. Simple, dismissive, final. But something was different now. Joshua did not laugh it off. He did not explain himself. He did not apologize again for the mistake. Instead, he rested his hands on the table and looked at her steadily. "A 14-year-old boy with $7 tried to help me today," he said calmly. Samantha shrugged slightly. "That's nice." Joshua held her gaze. He didn't know me. He didn't know me anything. But he saw a man about to walk out of a store feeling small, and he stepped in. Samantha reached for her glass again, clearly uninterested in the deeper meaning Joshua was pointing toward. Joshua continued anyway. "You know what he told me?" Samantha took a sip. "What?" "He said somebody helped his mother once when they needed it." Joshua paused then, letting the memory settle in his voice before he finished the thought. And that memory stayed with him long enough that when he saw someone else struggling, he acted on it. Samantha did not respond right away. Joshua leaned back slightly in his chair. His voice remained calm, but there was a firmness in it that had not been there before. "That boy showed more loyalty to a stranger in 30 seconds than you showed to your husband in 11 years. The room went completely quiet after that. Samantha stared at him, not angry exactly, but surprised. Joshua did not continue arguing. He simply finished the last bite of food on his plate, stood up, and carried his dish to the sink. Biscuit pattered across the kitchen floor and followed him toward the back door. Joshua stepped outside onto the porch and sat down on the wooden steps with the dog settling beside him. The air outside had grown colder, the kind of evening chill that makes your breath faintly visible when you exhale slowly. Joshua rested his elbows on his knees and looked out across the quiet street. He did not feel triumphant. He did not feel angry. What he felt instead was something quieter but stronger, a sense that a line inside his life had finally become visible. Sometimes it takes something small to show a man the truth about where he stands. Not a fight, not a betrayal, just a moment when kindness appears in the most unexpected place and holds up a mirror to everything else around it. Joshua sat there for a long time that night with Biscuit's warm weight pressed against his leg. And while the rest of Milfield slowly went about its ordinary evening, people cooking dinner, televisions humming in living rooms, traffic fading on the main road, Joshua understood that the $7 he had seen that afternoon had purchased something far more valuable than groceries. It had shown him exactly what kind of life he was living and exactly what kind of man he still had the chance to be.